Welcome to You're a Dragon Harry, the dungeon. Choose a buff at the start of the dungeon. Bronze applies haste, red versatility, green healing taken, blue mastery, and black crit. Avoid swirlies. The mana worms hurt, so just watch out for them. They'll pick a player, jump to them, and do an AoE explosion and a channeled frontal nuke beam. Vaximus. Intercept as many orbs as possible to prevent the boss from gaining energy and dealing AoE damage. Take the circles to the outside of the area to keep the room clean of puddles. At 100 energy, he does AoE damage and pushes you back. Avoid the swirlies. On Mythic, it's good to use personals or immunities like Turtle to soak orbs because of the Oversurge debuff, increasing your damage taken by the orbs by 100% for 20 seconds, which otherwise needs to be dispelled. Tanks avoid his frontal arcane expulsion. Karaf. Communicate with your group which goal you want to shoot at. Use your extra action button in the golden circle 3 times to choose either Firestorm, making you dodge swirlies, but stunning the boss and making it take 75% increased damage, or Gale Force, pushing you around the arena, making you collect orbs to become immune to the pushback, and granting you 45% haste and 50% move speed. This was bugged when we first did it on beta, and the orbs just wouldn't spawn, but this is what they look like. Both of these can be active at the same time. Watch out for Deafening Screech, which will interrupt and silence. Watch out for her frontal knockback. Tanks watch out for the Savage Peck Dot. The Fireflies will enrage nearby mobs. The Overgrown Ancient. Avoid swirlies and kill as many ads as possible. CC the ads that sprouted and nuke them. On Mythic, they'll apply a stacking poison on hit. Also on Mythic, a bleed will be applied to everyone, which must be cleansed by killing the Ancient branch and stacking on it. However, it also heals its allies with this, so make sure the boss and any other ads are far away. And interrupt their healing touch. Footage courtesy of Grau, because they actually changed this fight and I could not go back in to get footage. This trash is pretty deadly, with the Arcane Pulse AoE and interrupts, whirlwinds and arcane missiles. There's also circles around you that'll explode for a lot of damage. Doragosa can be summed up as avoid balls, circles, and her breath. Get out with the energy bomb circle, it'll kill people. Every ability you get hit with makes you gain a stack of a 5% damage buff, which at 3 stacks transforms into an arcane rift. So make sure that if you have 2 stacks of the buff, you're in a good spot to receive a 3rd buff and transform into a rift. So there isn't just a random puddle in the middle of the room. The more rift balls you get hit by, the more stacks you'll get, and the more rifts you'll spawn in turn, turning the room into a bullet hell. Welcome to... Wow, this dungeon's troll. The dungeon. You can skip most of this trash if you know how to skip the whelps. If you touch them, they will shriek and unpetrify nearby enemies, making you regret everything. You can pull a sneaky and run around them. You cannot interrupt them or knock them back. You can use knock-ups and stuns. Mystic Vapors does a lot of damage. The Arcane Tender stun. Laymore. Avoid the trees that grow. Put the circle around as many trees as possible to destroy them. Nuke the ads that spawn after. Avoid the frontal. Any trees caught in the slam are also destroyed. Laymore's stomp damage is increased by 20% for each tree that is alive. After using the tomes, you'll get a random buff or debuff that you have to check. The green circle is actually not bad, as it will stun nearby enemies. Looking like a cute little naga will slow enemies. Sometimes you might not get an effect at all. There's runes on the ground, which will polymorph you for quite a while if you stand in them. The stone dudes do a deadly frontal. Azure Blade, it's a DPS and healer check like Medivh. Kill the illusions as fast as possible, while avoiding all the orbs. Avoid her frontal conjured orb, and avoid her frontal tank cleave. Tilash is a DPS and healer race. Conserve as much room as possible by stacking or lining up the circles as close as possible. Direct stacking might kill you on high tyrannical weeks. Avoid the ice puddles left on the ground. They slow and do high taking damage. Get away from the person marked with Icy Devastator, his breath attack. When he goes to the center of the room and channels a huge AoE damage spell, move to one of the protective runes. Note that in Mythic, you all need to stack in the same rune. They become inactive after protecting a player. Umbracool. On Mythic, you'll gain a debuff, which will slow you by 7% stacking for 10 seconds every time you move. Kill as many crystals as you can that spawn at 75, 50, and 25% health. Otherwise, they'll detonate, leaving a nasty stacking dot on you. On Mythic, he'll do a pushback as well, with some damage. He also sheds hardened crystals with an absorb barrier. Dodge his deadly frontal breath. Dispel Dragon Strike on the tank. Avoid the orbs. Footage courtesy of Growl because they changed this fight again and I could not go back and get footage. Welcome to You Will Witness True Horror. Now rot. The dungeon. This dungeon is not part of Mythic Plus Season 1. Therefore we couldn't teleport to it on the beta and test it, so there won't be any footage, but I'll tell you what the fight might look like on Mythic thanks to the dungeon journal. You can stealth around most of this trash and open any cages you can without entering combat. Be careful of the whirlwind. The Bracken War Scourge increases nearby enemy damage done, does a bleed you need to heal up, and can fear. Vicious Claw Mangle is a fixate. Like in Court of Stars, you'll find profession items here you can interact with for some kind of buff. The Warband. On Mythic, you really need to try not to take damage, as with every 10% total HP missing from players, they gain a 10% haste buff stacking. DPS them down evenly, or Trick Totem will cast Blood Frenzy whenever a gnoll hits 15% HP, increasing their damage done and their haste by 30%. Tanks intercept Savage Charge. Kill the Hextrick Totem ASAP. Interrupt Greater Healing Rapids. Avoid the Blade Storm that'll chase people down. Don't be in front of Rira. She cleaves. Dispel Decayed Senses. Heal players above 90% health for Gash Frenzy to run out. And on Mythic, dump heals on the player marked for butchery. Make sure everyone is inside the gates before starting any trash, because on beta it was bugged and people got locked out. The bears can enrage a target. Lots of stealth and traps in these halls. Gut shot. Avoid traps and swirlies. An arrow above your head means you're marked for trap placement. Place them in convenient spots. On Mythic, the traps will not disappear after being triggered and will rearm after 5 seconds. Use the traps to trap and kill the adds quickly, or Gut shot will eventually cast Master's Call, freeing them from traps, making them immune to movement CC and increasing their speed by 15%. Interrupt this. If they're close to Gut shot, they will leap more frequently, doing more damage, and gain 15% damage done. Gut shot will mark a player they'll fixate on for 10 seconds and enrage them, increasing their damage done by 100%. On Mythic, if they bite you, you take damage, are slowed by 50%, take 50% less healing, and take a nasty dot for 10 seconds. Tank, don't get knocked back into a trap with Gut shot. Tree Mouth, establish a consume rotation. After being pulled in by grasping vines, one player must willingly get eaten by him by being the closest player, or he enrages. On Mythic, a player can only be eaten once per minute because of a 200% damage taken increase. Everyone except the intended target needs to be at least 10 yards away. After ingesting a player, the group must burn down his shield to get Treemouth to spit them out. He'll also spit them out after 10 seconds, but you're probably dead by then. Make sure they're topped off, or sayonara. If you get marked, face it to a convenient spot. You'll spawn a bunch of adds. Kill them in a good spot as they leave puddles. Melee, be careful as they deal damage within 5 yards of them and explode on death. Dispel the infectious spit disease if you can. Tanks, watch out for his frontal cleave and knockback. The Rot Hexers put a circle around people that reduces damage done by 20% and spreads. The more people have it, the more power the Hexer will siphon. Decatriac, Wrath-Eye. Spread, but don't be in front of her. Each time you take damage, you gain a stack of Withering Rot, which the boss will absorb at 100 energy, dealing AoE damage around you and increasing her damage done by 5% per stack. One stack drops for each melee attack she does. Withering Rot reduces your damage done by 5% per stack, and on Mythic does not decay until the fight ends, or Wrath-Eye absorbs it via decaying strength. Be careful of her frontal breath and stay out of the poison cloud that forms after. It does damage and silences. Kill the Rotburst totem ASAP. It'll do AoE damage and apply stacks. The tank will regularly gain a healing absorb because of Decay Strike. Welcome to the tank in particular. The dungeon. This dungeon is not part of Mythic Plus Season 1, therefore we couldn't teleport to it on the beta and test it, so there won't be any footage, but I'll tell you what the fight might look like on Mythic thanks to the dungeon journal. The containment apparatus is to Expulse, which does heavy AoE damage, and also a beam that roots the target, both interruptible. Put Power Overload in a good spot before dispelling or expiring, as it leaves a pretty large AoE zone. Avoid swirlies, kite the adds to the boss and kill them under his feet. You need their spell to dispel his shield. On Mythic, this will trigger swirlies to spawn, which you need to avoid. The longer the shield is up, the more % damage he gains for the rest of the fight. On Mythic, this will also increase the size of the AoE pools. Don't stand with the tank. You'll get stunned for a brief second with Titanic Fist. The frogs are kind of untankable and apply a stacking poison dot, which at 10 stacks will kill the player instantly. The fireflies will disorient the tank if Dazzle goes through. From this point on, there will be random stealth mobs, which will stun the first person they see if they aren't on stealth. The Goliath frog is all about managing adds and stacks. Players must rotate for Gulp, getting 3 stacks of the poison debuff by being inside his circle for him to munch on, or he becomes hangry and gains a 50% damage buff. Manage the spells, CC and Gulp rotation before any player hits 10 stacks and dies. Avoid swirlies, otherwise it's more of a healer fight with constant ticks of damage going out. The Gusting Proto-Dragon will stun random players with Binding Winds, which is dispellable. Interrupt as much as you can, avoid frontals and AoE on the ground. Kajin. Avoid her hailstorm by hiding behind ice boulders. However, you need to make sure to hide behind good boulders, not damaged ones. It is kind of hard to see, but damaged ones will be cracked. If you hide behind damaged boulders, you'll take damage as they'll explode after. Avoid her ring of ice on the ground moving outward. Dispel the slows on players. There will be constant AoE damage going out. And on Mythic, she'll conjure a cyclone towards a player, dealing damage, knocking them back, and damaging any ice boulders hit. Make sure to position yourself so that you don't hit any good boulders with this. Don't get swept away by the water glob. It's a long run back. You can fall off the edge. Interrupt Raging Boil as it will increase their damage done. Tidal Divergence makes this mob split into a lot of smaller mobs. Interrupt the mini-boss and stay out of her AoE. Tsunami. Tanks must stay in melee range and be careful of his knockback. Avoid the bubbles. Dispel players who touch bubbles and get a slow. Kill adds as soon as possible, as they'll increase the tsunami's damage done. On Mythic, avoid the crashing waves that will spawn. There will be occasional AoE damage. Welcome to... Hi, I'm Deathwing and welcome to my crib. The dungeon. This dungeon is not part of Mythic Plus Season 1, therefore we couldn't teleport to it on the beta and test it, so there won't be any footage, but I'll tell you what the fight might look like on Mythic thanks to the dungeon journal. The Spine Crusher's knockback with Brutal Strike. Molten Core transforms a nearby elemental to make it pulse AoE damage. Magma Tusk. This is a DPS race. At 100 magma, he mutates and gains stacking damage, increases the number of lava waves going out, and increases the duration of an AoE damage pulse. Face lava spray away from other people. Stay somewhat together and avoid swirlies. They leave behind puddles of lava that on Mythic cannot touch the boss, or it increases all damage done by it by 50%. Avoid the charge and make sure it's pointed in a good direction, preferably a wall. On Mythic, it'll leave behind a trail of lava. Avoid the lava waves. The Kalashi Hunter's brown swirlies will root and deal damage if stood in. The Phoenixes are a pain and it's just cast. This is a mini-boss. Overseer Lahar will do a slam with swirls to dodge and an interrupt shout. Interrupt, mending clay. The bone tenders run for help. You can use these chains to deal damage and stun in the area around it, but the damage also applies to you and your party. Chargath. At 100 energy, Chargath not only goes ham on the tank, but also anyone within 6 yards. Also spewing out a bunch of lava swirlies to avoid. He'll put chains on players that slow you, and if anyone crosses the chains, they break it, dealing AoE damage with slag eruption, and apply fetter to themselves. The idea is to run your chains into the boss, or the boss through the chains, and make him break them, slowing him for 8 seconds, and trip him 3 times to stun him, and make him take 75% increased damage for 12 seconds, to make him stop his blade lock. However, you need to make sure you space out the breaking of the chains because of a stacking dot, which will kill you if you overdo it. The spears also leave a puddle around them while active. Avoid the lava waves and heal the bleed. Avoid the Iron Torch's frontal breath. The blacksmiths do AoE damage and do a focused tank slam. The Forged Rod monstrosity pulses AoE and will begin to detonate at low HP. Kill it before the cast goes off. Forge Master Gorek. He'll occasionally leap to his anvil to deal AoE damage. Spread out as he'll throw his shield at a player, dealing splash damage, and avoid swirlies that are triggered in 4 directions from them. On Mythic, a total of 3 players will release these lines. Avoid swirlies coming from the forge. Tanks will get yeeted away, and Gorek will try to crossbody dive you. Get out of the circle ASAP. On Mythic, this will leave a pool of fire behind, so position yourself in a convenient way. Like in Court of Stars, you'll find profession items here you can interact with for some kind of buff. The lava bearers drop puddles. The wardens do a frontal cone. The bird channels AoE and pushes you back with each tick. Warlord Saga. When her shield comes up, you get to sift through gold piles on the ground for magical items to help you take it down faster. Use your extra action button near the boss with Anti-Magic Bomb, Seismic Boots, or Rose of the Veil, and use it on the boss with the Wand of Negation and Azure Stone of Might. On Mythic, picking up a weapon will afflict you with a Curse Dot, which is likely undispellable. The longer her shield is up, the more damage you take from her AoE pulse. On Mythic, avoid swirlies during this. Position yourself so that the swirlies she throws out before her shield will not land in a bad spot, as they'll spawn an ad and leave puddles. These ads fixate a random player. On Mythic, they'll also have a shield you need to burn through, so it's good to hold on to one of those items from the shield phase depending on your DPS. Avoid her frontal cone.
Okay, there's the tank buster. Oh, that's actually really cool.
That was awesome.
You just uppercutted me, threw me across the room, and then went to slam on me. I feel like I should just copy and paste boss died before it did mechanics into all these feedbacks.
Right?
Welcome to
You gonna learn today, boy.
the dungeon. This dungeon spans the entire Onaran Plains zone. If you don't know how to dragon ride, the gusts of wind will keep you aloft.
But you gonna learn today if you want to Tom Keys.
The order of bosses can be chosen, to my knowledge, except the last boss. But every time I've done this dungeon, it's been this clockwise route around the map. Clear out this area. Stay out of the stun swirly. The Lance Masters and Planestompers will cast Disruptive Shout. Bad for your healers. The horn sounders can be really dangerous. They'll sound their horn, increasing nearby allies' damage and also calling nearby pets to join them. Granith Eruption will quite simply annihilate you if you let it go off too much. On High Tyrannical, one tick will probably kill you. You have to use the spears located around the room to stun Granith and make him take a % of his health as damage. As of beta, the spears don't fire instantly and have a small cast time. Look around the room to identify which spear will be active, and tell your group which spear to use as they need time to reload after. On Mythic, ads will spawn which will ignore players and just attempt to disable the spears. Kill them ASAP. They can be CC'd. Avoid his stomp, and occasionally he spews out AoE damage. Interrupt the Storm Speaker Summon Squall, as the Summon Squall will keep doing an AoE damage cast until it or the speaker is killed. The Storm Speaker also casts a nasty interruptible AoE called Tempest, which leaves a stacking dot on you. Avoid swirlies cast by the Storm Surge totem, but do collect orbs. They function the same as on the boss, increasing damage and healing done by 5% stacking. The Stormcallers will do Totemic Overload, dealing AoE damage to enemies around the Storm Surge totem. Spread about 10 yards as Arcing Strike is like a chain lightning for melee, the Raging Tempest. The tank must remain in melee range. Collect as many orbs as you can without dying. They increase your damage and healing done, which helps as the boss will periodically do a massive AoE damage channel. Any orbs that reach the boss will also deal AoE damage and increase his damage done by 5% stacking. Spread out with your circles, and on Mythic, be sure not to hit any orbs with your circle, as this will destroy them and deal damage within 10 yards of it. If they're about to reach the boss and the tank can't soak, feel free to destroy them. Lots of swirlies to dodge, curses and diseases to dispel, and an annoying root. The Death Speaker's Chant of the Dead increases nearby undead mob damage done and reduces their damage taken, while inflicting AoE damage to all players within 10 yards. Shatter Soul targets a player, reducing their damage done by 30%. Your soul fragment spawns somewhere and you have to retrieve it before it reaches the Soul Harvester, or they gain a shadow damage increase. Dominate mind controls. There's lots of Deathbolt and Deathbolt volleys to interrupt. Tira and Maruk. Keep them together by 20 yards at all times or they enrage. As of beta, they share health. Tira will leap from location to location and shoot people. At 100 energy, Tira shoots an arrow at a target. On Mythic, everyone except the tank, dealing damage and making 4 tornadoes burst from their location, dealing damage and knocking back if hit. On Mythic, the tornadoes go out and back in before disappearing. Interrupt Guardian Wind or get pushed back. At 100 energy, he will make the ground underneath players erupt. Just dodge swirlies. On Mythic, they'll erupt 3 times. Stay out of his fear circle. Tanks watch out for Brutalize. Real heavy physical damage. Wee woo, key depletion police. Do not. So stupid. Do not, unless they fix it on live, attempt to fly into the stronghold or anywhere near it. You will regret it. Land somewhere close and use a normal flying mount or ground mount to be safe to walk into the stronghold, or you will get teleported out the long way. Interrupt Tempest Call, which turns into a shield and deals damage. The Warhounds will pounce and interrupt the target of the Houndman's command, Seek. Balakar. Get out with the circle and avoid his charge towards the spear. Avoid swirlies. Tanks watch out for his bleed and a heavy physical strike. During the intermission, interrupt and CC as much as you can and kill the ads. There will be constant pushback. During phase 2, get somewhat close to the big blue circle if you don't want to get yoinked from Valhalla, and GTFO ASAP after it pulls everyone to its location. Balakar will immediately charge towards it. He seems to charge a set distance even if you put it real close to him. Stack the smaller circles closely together to keep the room clean of puddles. Stay out of his frontal. Dispel Conductive Strike on the tank.
He's gonna solo this.
Nice.
Welcome to Any Percent Speedrun. The dungeon. This is a mini-boss. He'll charge at a random player and a slashing attack that leaves fire swirlies on the ground. Meladrusa Chillworn. The most important mechanic on this boss wasn't working correctly on beta. CC and manage ads, as at 5 stacks, Primal Chill is supposed to stun you and deal damage. DPS her shield down and interrupt her as soon as possible. Avoid swirlies and take the big circle away from people as it'll suck you in. Stay away from the ice crystals. The fires will do large amounts of AoE damage. Avoid swirlies and circles. Just leave the flame dancers to do their blaze of glory once they die. They won't actually die until they've completed this cast, so just avoid the swirlies and run away. On Mythic, there will be 2 dragon mobs which will kick your ass if you don't pay attention. They both do a frontal cone. Flame Gullet, on reaching 50% HP, will pulse fire damage every 2 seconds, ramping up in damage. Thunderhead knocks back and puts a debuff on people which when it expires or is dispelled does AoE damage. Kokia. Avoid boulders and circles. Kill the ads ASAP. Their AoE hurts. Interrupt if you can. This fight becomes way more difficult on Mythic. The boulders and ads leave huge fire patches, so stay somewhat stacked to manage where the ads and boulders will spawn until you run out of room. Once a boulder impacts the wall, it'll explode for AoE damage. You seem to be able to kite the boss way out of her original space, but I wouldn't go too far and risk anything. The thunderstorms will always do a truckload of AoE damage. This trash just sucks to heal, so use as much CC as possible. Urquhart and Kadaka. This fight is kinda booty, not gonna lie. It's a lot of AoE damage. Dodge fire pools as best as you can, as they apply a stacking dot. Leave Inferno Core near other pools of fire, as you'll spawn another fire puddle from Inferno Core. Inferno Core being the circle around you. Once Inferno Core runs out, you'll also do AoE damage to other players. On Mythic, stepping into the fire pools will also reapply and stack Inferno Core. You leave a pool of fire for each stack of Inferno Core. Once either of them hits 50% HP, they'll mount and the fight becomes significantly harder. It's best to get Karaka as low as possible. Once he's mounted, burn down the dragon as fast as possible, so you don't have to deal with the fire anymore. Dodge the big fire breath. Winds of Change will push you and the pools of fire in a random direction. On Mythic, be careful of interrupting Cloudburst, which will deal damage and interrupt you. Dispel Storm Slam on the tank, especially on Mythic as it turns into a stacking tank buster. Welcome to... wait, I've been here before. The dungeon. This dungeon is not part of Mythic Plus Season 1, therefore we couldn't teleport to it on the beta and test it, so there won't be any footage, but I'll tell you what the fight might look like on Mythic thanks to the Dungeon Journal. The Lost Vikings. Stay away from the player with the brown circle. Don't stand with the tank and avoid swirlies. They leave a stacking dot if hit. Watch out for Balog's Cleave, and tanks sidestep the heavy arrow, a straight line attack which also knocks back. Avoid the red, Eric's charge, or it will disorient you along with damage. He also just tosses out random damage. Interrupt Olaf's shield or tank them out of the bubble. At 100 energy, they will longboat raid. On Mythic, pulsing fire damage with every cannon shot, and the swirls will leave behind fire patches. Each Viking in the boat increases its rate of fire. When a dwarf hits 10% health remaining, he'll retreat to the longboat for the rest of the battle. Even them out over the course of the fight or you're gonna have a bad time. The big trogs enrage and do a stun swirly. Bromak. Spread out for chain lightning. Interrupt and avoid the slam. Kill the quaking totem. It will increase the trog's damage taken by 200%. However, on Mythic, this only affects trogs within 8 yards of the totem. Make sure to utilize the totem stun for when Bromak casts Bloodlust on himself and his fellow trogs. While it's alive, it pulses AoE damage. Earthen Custodians cleave and apply bleeds. Stunning the Refti will increase the damage they take by 50%. For 6 seconds, they apply a bleed and gain a stacking damage and haste buff. Talondras. At 100 energy, she becomes enraged, increasing her damage by 50% and making her immune to CC for 40 seconds. You have to kite her through 3 of the Titan orbs in the room to stun her and drain her energy because she is immune to the first 2 stuns. Class stuns like Shockwave work as well. On Mythic, each time she is stunned, she gains 10% damage done for the rest of the fight. Players can also soak the orbs and be stunned, so avoid them. Move the circles near the tank since this is where the orbs will spawn, so they don't have to run all the way to Timbuktu to get them. Position yourself so you don't get knocked into an orb. Healers watch out for a random bleed debuff on someone. The bad sonic burst will spell lock you, and spiders pounce on people. Emberon, avoid the flame beams and balls, and kill ads ASAP. Spread out with the AoE circle. Don't try to leap through the beams on high keys. It'll end badly. You can blink through the lines, but you can't jump over them. Tanks use a defensive for Searing Clap. It's a frontal cleave, but it also applies a dispellable dot to everyone, regardless of position. Stun, knock up or knock back. Hail of Stone to avoid ticks of AoE damage. Curse of Stone slows. This is gonna be a spicy pull if you pull big. Watch out for Blessing of Tear, Hail of Stone, Thunderous Clap, Swirlies on the ground, and puddles. Blessing of Tear buffs nearby mobs and also does damage inside the bubble. Interrupt Earthen Ward or deal with the high shield. Stone Eruption does AoE damage upon expiration around the stunned player. The golems do an AoE clap.
I'm sorry, Edith. I was being careful. 'Cause this trash hurt like heck.
Last time I was in this dungeon, and I'm pretty sure it'll be dangerous on high mythics. The Infinite Reavers steal your time and apply a stacking dot. The Infinite Agents cast a haste buff. Chrono Lord Deus. Stay out of the sand zones. They'll expand and do damage and reduce your haste by 30% if you stand in them. Once your screen goes somewhat grey, step into the puddles to gain a 50% haste buff as they shrink, while the boss channels AoE damage. Stay away from his frontal breath. Don't get wing buffeted into a puddle. On Mythic, he'll apply a slowing debuff to a player, which also does ticking damage. Dispelling it causes people around them to take damage and get knocked back, so get away from people if you have it.